Streaming live now everywhere proper. I went live and you're about to tap some. What should you do, ladies and gents? I'm hoping that tap wasn't supposed to be fap by any chance. Although you could do both. But yeah, this I would either, both of them involve recorded media, so yeah, either way you'll be good to look at this later. So today, because football starts tomorrow and it's really, I want all you guys to make as much money as possible. The last day that a lot of this is going to be useful, so I do want to talk about process versus flexibility today. Process we've talked about a little bit on the last couple episodes of this, basically, again, our quest is constantly to overcome the edge of the house, the edge of your opponents, who will have some edge over you in some way, probably. You're not going to be strictly superior to them in all ways. So how are you overcoming the fact that, the house is grabbing 15% of the action? How are you getting that back? And one of the ways is by refining your process. But it's important to understand that the refinement of a process should be defined as making the process better, not necessarily making the process simpler or more rigid. There's a number of fields of science, organizational studies, which deal with dynamics and complex systems and have to do with the amount of flexibility you want in an ideal organizational system to be efficient. That was a lot of words that didn't mean much, but look at it this way. Let's say you have a small business, someone, you own a store, which I did for a dozen years, and you have 5, 10, 12 employees. They probably all need to be able to wear a few different hats. They need to be able to do a couple different things for the system to function efficiently. If you have 10,000 employees, you can have half of those who only do one thing. If they do it well and they don't burn out from doing one thing, we're setting aside motivation and psychology in this conversation. You can have a guy who just, I do customer service all day. I answer the phones all day. But the fewer incremental units you have, and you yourself are one, the more important it is that they can be broken down and not have to remain rigid. You may enjoy remaining rigid all day, but flexibility is particularly important in this. So, if you have 10 employees, they're each putting out X work. You have 10X work to distribute among the 172 tasks you need in a day. Well, that's really difficult if you must use a minimum of 10% of your process on each thing. So, I'm lucky all my jobs have always had a lot of flexibility. So I get to travel for the company, or I just wrote a press release a little while ago. Sometimes I work in design, sometimes I do development. So again, drawing this back into the DFS environment, the environment isn't static that you're trying to achieve in. It can be close. You can play MLB X days in a row, and it's a very similar process each day. There's still going to be subtle variations where a couple games rain out, or you have 5-game slate versus a 10-game slate, or how exactly to approach it when we're talking about Tyrod Taylor, or Tyrod, right? They announced it should be pronounced with the softer pronunciation. How does that affect who's playing? What if there's a football game the same day? Like there's MLB running on Sunday, I'm sure. How does the fact that NFL and MLB are running concurrently affect the MLB process? Is the field softer or harder due to the fact that NFL is running concurrently? Does it generate overlay? All these little things are little edges of 0.1% and 0.3% and maybe a full 2% if you know what you're doing, where you're trying to climb up that ladder to get over the top of the rake. So let's go through a number of examples, and there's really dozens of them. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, we're talking about the stuff. I'm going to start real specifics. I may do a show Tuesday when I'm in Chicago with Awesome. I'll see if I can get him to sit next to me and we'll bang something out. May do a personal Periscope between now and then, but the next real show after this is going to be on Wednesday. I'm going to start breaking down the NBA teams. Those shows will be longer because I'm going to do probably 6 shows for the divisions, right? Yeah, there's 6 divisions in the NBA with 5 teams each. So I'll probably do 6 shows, handle 5 teams apiece, really talk about everything that changed in the offseason, guys we think we can target for DFS, guys who I expect to see significant change versus their previous usage in DFS, ways that we can just make a little extra money, and most importantly for the preseason, talk about the coaching and the tendencies, guys I think we can get minutes. Let's start by what's my take on Deshaun Watson? I mean, he's obviously got all the upside in the world. Um, he went in there and spanked the hell out of these Patriots not that long ago, and this is a Patriots team that really hasn't changed significantly. He's got all hands on deck, all his weapons, and is fully healthy. So obviously, there's all the upside in the world. It's difficult for me to quantify how much the league will learn about him or has learned about him. I will say I think the Patriots are at least an above average organization as far as their ability to do their homework, how they function after a bye, and they've had obviously some time to prep for this game. So I think this game will be itself a good litmus test for how well Deshaun Watson can continue to excel expectations in the NFL. So I'm really interested to see it. But again, football not my main sport. I don't like giving advice when I'm not super confident in it. So wouldn't be surprised to see him go crush again. I mean, he looked very good in all aspects of the game against this almost exact same Patriots team. But also would not be surprised to see them come up with some answers. The Patriots are very good at taping practices. My name is Eddie, as portended in the title. The edge in this game will be how much of an effect his ACL injury has. Sure, there's any certainly it'll be interesting to see. And again, I would think that you should know that. Like, even outside of team speak, obviously the coaches are going to say he looks great, and that you can almost ignore that. But there is going to have been some impartial observers in the media by now who are going to say he looks 100%, he looks 90%. Like, there's guys coming back. We were talking about DeMarcus Cousins the other day. He looks about 50%. Clearly, not everything is functioning all speed with that guy. He can barely dunk off that foot, and so he's got a long road to hoe. He's going to, not be back, I would think, till about New Year's if I had to throw a guess at it. But again, not allowed to play DFS anymore because of my day job, so I don't know, per se, exactly Deshaun Watson's condition, but that's something you should be able to figure out with a little bit of research. I'm almost ready for NBA. I'm moving through a lot of stuff now. I'll be ready by the beginning of the preseason, which, again, has been the best time of year, basically 3 years in a row. We're going to try to absolutely crush that, so I'll be putting in a lot of time to make sure we're there. But so, all right, so research. And we're going to talk about various ways, again, in which there's a process and how you can remain flexible in that process. But again, and this is going to be a recurring theme over the course of this show, people tend to get good or get decent and stop trying to improve themselves in various ways. So I'm just going to list a lot of ways, and probably at least one will apply to you where you'll be like, yeah, that's a fair point. So again, there's a few ways to fairly obviously tell if you're coming up short on research. But the two most obvious are, one, did you miss a guy who was really, really good and you didn't even think about playing Bob, and Bob went off and scored 50 points? Or even more importantly, did you not think about Bob and Bob was like 60% owned? Or even 30% owned. Significantly owned, obviously, depending on the size of the slate in the sport. And the second one is more of a concern than the first one, because obviously with variance, some guys are occasionally going to crush. But if you've frequently seen one or even worse, both of these things happen, quite possibly, ask yourself a hard question, your research is in some way lacking. Now, even if that isn't a specific problem that's happening to you, there's still a lot of process to refine in research. First off, obviously, where? Here's something I've asked many people in the past, not this year, in the past, and I'm pretty sure in this result, even asking friends of mine, people who are professional and do this for a living, people who are high-volume guys, even if it's not their day job, how frequently do you refine your process? It's not often enough for me. Being specific, let's talk about MLB players this year. I would suggest that it is very unlikely that more than 10% of them have changed their process since April. You get in there and you talk about this and you look for new sites maybe, but once shit gets going, it sort of turns into a grind and it becomes a very get up, go to the gym, go to work, have lunch at the same place, yada yada, go home. A lot of people are spending 2-3+ hours a day on MLB between watching the games and doing their research and entering the contests and whatever post-game process you do. There's no way it isn't a more efficient use of that system to spend 30 minutes once a month just Googling MLB daily fantasy research and see what comes up. Worst things that happens is you spent 0.5% of your time in that month looking up something that didn't happen to pan out. And best thing that happens is you made the next 100 hours much more functional. And that is a real fault I've found in people who play DFS is whether or not they're losing or winning well, they really get to a point and just do this. And barring, a half dozen guys who I think are the half dozen best guys in the world at this, you should constantly be looking to refine your process in a lot of ways. Time is another thing we should discuss. You all only have so much time. You get an hour, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe it's your full-time job. But you want to refine how that time is spent. How much time each day do you spend entering contests? The physical actions of entering contests. If it's just a minute or two, that's fine. You've got that down. I don't know how many sites you're playing. I don't know whether you do it several times, but how well are you spending that time? I know at least 3 people personally who have hired people to enter contests for them because it's dead time. Just like, here, I'll give you $20 a day, enter stuff. Guy's entering $50,000 a day. The 20% is an irrelevant figure, and it buys him an extra 12 minutes to research. That 12 minutes is worth well more than that at that time of day with all that information going on. Think of just all the places you research. Take a minute and, or not just research, but spend time prior to lock. How valuable are those things to you? And how much time do they take? Let's assume you go to Site A every day and read guy number 1's breakdown, and then you go to Site B and look at a guy's cheat sheet, and then you spend the last 12 minutes before lock on Twitter looking for late breaking news, looking at beat reporters. Okay? How much time do you spend on A versus B? C, you really can't get rid of. That seems an essential part of the process. Although, again, if you're a member of like a team at awesemo.com or other places, they got a Slack chat. People are screaming if anything breaks that's relevant. So you can just keep that over there and be researching the whole time. A lot of people don't do that. One of the real advantages to being on a site is that time. You can keep building and refining and updating right up until lock. Because if anything breaks, people are screaming about it on monitor number 2 there. Are you working on a PC as opposed to a phone? How much are you playing a day? If you're playing past a certain amount on a day and you're doing all your research on a phone, that's an inefficient system. Okay, I've got, a combined 70 inches of monitors here, and here. So I can be working, talking, streaming, but I've still got news breaking in here, and I've got TweetDeck here, and I've got the chat here, and this spleen is here. There's a point at which that's, a really important usage of time there. Let's talk about the segue into contest selection. I'm sure, are you sure you're playing an optimal amount of cash versus GPP where you can keep things going, avoid going bust by going crazy? Like, even if you're only playing 10% of your back roll a day and you think you're good and you win 60% of days, you're going to run off 4-day streaks sometimes. And if you're playing all GPPs, you can trash a lot of money right now. You should just not play if you can play only on your phone. You can just not play if you can play only on your phone and are playing to win and are playing enough where losing matters. If those things are all true, yes, then you shouldn't play on your phone. It's fine to play DFS, and 93% of people do, to have a good time. Okay, I'd love the good time aspect was not irrelevant for me. I'm very jealous that tomorrow I don't get to fire up Red Zone and play. Very jealous. But yeah, if you're trying to make money, or if it's some of your motivation, if you're like, look, I really like playing DFS, but I'd like to make more money, Suzanne Stummer's style, sure we all do, then yeah, it's some responsibility to refine your process, or not. It's up to you, obviously. But, segue into contest selection. Are you playing the right mix of contests, right cash versus GPP? Are you playing the right cash contests? I have frequent conversations with people who say, should I play head-to-heads or 50-50s or double-ups? And I say, it totally depends on what the rake rates are on those. Okay, myself, I generally preferred to play 50-50s for the longest time. I would join all the 50-50s when they were big enough that there wasn't an issue with trains of 100 and various things. That's not really relevant here, but I would join just 1,000 of those. And at the end of every day, I would pretty much either, for that segment of my investment, double up or lose it all. So basically, your lineup is good enough to hit the top half, or you were just going to miss the top half. But if you're less comfortable with that, still want to play cash, but don't want to have that much of a win-it-all, lose-it-all situation, joining head-to-heads gives you a greater variation of results that you'll get during the week. Basically, you can plot your the performance of, let's assume you're using one cash lineup for this example, from 0 to 100. If you get 100, well, then you will still double up, just like you would have half the time in GPPs. But sometimes you'll win 82% of your head-to-heads, rather. Sometimes you'll win 61%. Rarely will you lose it all. Rarely will you bang out the 0 lineup, where your lineup is worse than 99+% of the lineups on the site playing head-to-heads. So even on the days you lose, you're probably holding in 20-25%. Long term, those two things probably break you about even. But which one are you more comfortable with? If you don't feel bad, just shit, a guy got hurt, I lost everything. As opposed to if you're in head-to-heads, you're still perfectly competitive against the other people playing that guy. So that's a personal preference. But more than all of what I just said, which one has lower rake? There's sites where 50-50s and head-to-head rake are not identical. Play the one with the lower rake, because otherwise they're close to the hell enough. Same thing with double-ups. There's plenty of sites where there's head-to-heads and double-ups, and the rake on double-ups is higher, depending on whether it's a 37-person double-up or a 43. You've obviously all seen the weird numbers, probably. So knocking off a percentage or two of rake is much more important than any other variegation between those different types of cash contests. Look at that. Like, so there's some people are just like, I don't know, like, that's significant, a percentage or two. And another thing I want to bring up is, you know, just getting one thing right can make the difference between being, you know, average and really good. If you make one process fix a month, if you react more quickly to news once a month, that can be the difference between you making $5,000 a month and breaking even, depending on your investment, or making $5,000 a month instead of $2,000. Which is the difference between making $60,000 a year and 24, which is, you know, a comfortable job and a shit, I don't have time to spend full time and do this right, but that's not enough money to live on, and having to overextend your bankroller. So, you know, it's very similar to poker in that, you know, there's a lot of hurry up and wait, hurry up around it, hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait, and then, okay, I've got the nuts. I've actually got the aces over kings. How do I do this to get every cent I can? How do I have to? And that's very similar in DFS. Like, I was like, oh shit, there's going to be overlay this week. How are you going to get everything you can out of that overlay? Oh shit, news broke, you know, at 6:57 that I think gives me a huge advantage. So yeah, we'll use that segue into and talk a little bit more. But I mean, I really want to say, like, contest selection, I want to step back to that for a second. I talked about the cash there for a second. Even GPPs, I'm sorry for the couple questions I've missed, will fire up. I'll certainly handle as many questions as you want at the end. I can't play because I work for a DFS offerer, and both the company I work for and FanDuel and DraftKings don't allow you to do that. You can't work for a DFS company and play at a DFS company. But not just the cash contests like 50-50s and double-ups have variations, and the GPPs do too. And, you know, you have to figure out, are you comfortable playing a $109 GPP that's going to only rake you 10% as opposed to putting a dozen entries in at $10 a piece, which is about the same price, and those are going to rake you 14%? There's a number of questions there, but there's still a lot of nuance between those structures there. If you take a pro NFL DFS player who is profitable, take Osmo, name any number of people. I don't want to name people I don't work with because somehow people manage to take offense frequently, and I try not to do that. But if I took the 10 most profitable NFL DFS players in the world and said that, okay, you don't have to change anything, keep your same process, you keep your same brain, you're exactly the same guy, but the only tournaments you can play in this year are qualifiers for live events and the Millie Maker, and I give that restriction to those 10 guys, I would say 6 of them would no longer be profitable. Somewhere in that range. Certainly at least 4. But maybe 5, 6, 7 of them who previously were going to make $1 million on the NFL season. And I'm setting aside guys who happen to spike $1 million. I mean, they're going to play $100,000 a week and they're going to win the majority of their contests, and this is how they make a living. You limit their contest selection to having to play really top-heavy luck bomb. You have to come in first, or again, top 10 out of 296,000 to justify your expenses throughout the year. Most of them won't get there, and it's not because they're not just as good. It's because the process. They're not in the right contests. So sure, we'll use that and segue into talking about bankroll management and contest selection flexibility. I will happily say the back when I started playing DFS, which is, oh Jesus, 6.5 years ago or what have you, I went busto twice, the only 2 times I ever did, and they were both in the first couple months where I just kept throwing it all back in, because I don't know how I didn't know that wasn't going to work out eventually, but it seemed so easy, and in fairness, back then it was much easier than it is now. In every way, the competition was worse, and there wasn't as much public information, and there was overlay, and just, it was a glorious time to be alive. But, you know, I think the first time I bought in, I should look this up, but it was $50 or $100 or something, and I built that up to $1,000 and was playing the grand today, and then randomly only played, you know, one lineup one day with all of it behind it, and it got lost. And I'm like, huh. And then I did that like again, and then I went, okay, clearly there's a, you know, which is ridiculous, but again, do I like Kenyon Drake this year? I mean, playing for a bad team doesn't do a lot for me there, but to me, it's a guy who there's enough risk, and his name seems to be popular enough. And the biggest issue with playing like Kenyon Drake this week, outside of, you know, tournaments obviously, and even there, is so many good running backs this week. I haven't looked at FanDuel pricing, but looking at DraftKings pricing, there's like 12 running backs that cost, you know, $3,900 to $4,500. I'm not actually going to be doing it, but I was going to be hosting a show on football tomorrow morning, and I spent some time looking at it, and I'm like, Jesus. Which is really interesting with how contrarian I think. Like, there's a lot of extra merit in tournaments to playing expensive running backs, because fuck do you want to play cheap and medium price ones? Alex Collins at $5,600 is underpriced. He's been really efficient when given the time and given enough carries, and he should really get all the carries now. Christian McCaffrey at $6,400. All those options, and then all these guys at from Burkhead to Royce Freeman to James Conner to all these guys at $4,000. So a lineup that's running out, I don't know, Ezekiel Elliott and Kareem Hunt is going to be really fucking unique because so much of the good value, to my understanding, is in those cheap running backs. Now, there's the real chance that those guys each get 35 and two of the 4K guys get 30, and you're still going to be up Schitt's Creek. But it seems like the contest construction really pushes you to, you know, cheap running back, medium-priced running back, stud wide receiver, Gronk, Andy Dalton, Phillip Rivers, whatever, and decent defense. Like, it really seems to push you that way. So all those cheap running backs, I do think, are you know, distortive. And again, that's a process question. The player pool changes. Another overall thing I want to convey here is, and again, I said it at the beginning, you want to refine your process, but that means making it better, not making it rigid. I'm trying to think the best way to express the point. But again, talking about like employees in a business, you need guys who can do different things. If everyone can only do a thing, your system is inherently inefficient. And it's the same thing with your process in DFS. If you narrow it down to, I do this every day, that will be not ideal ever, and really not ideal sometimes, where you need to focus on certain things. You know, another thing we talked about is, are you spending more when there's overlay? If not, why? If you're going to spend $100 a day, and that's what you're going to pay when the rake is pulling 15 or 16% of your investment, why are you spending $100 a day when the rake is going to pull 3% of your investment, or give you back 5%, or only pull 8%? That doesn't make sense. Again, blackjack poker, when you have an edge, you bet more. When you get, you know, are you spending more when you have another edge? Do you have a process in place to implement that plan? Not the vague idea, it's a strict understanding exactly how you do so. You know, it's an NBA day, tip off 7 o'clock. 6:50, you get news that this guy's going to be out and this guy's going to be starting, and you think that's a really significant edge because the first guy who is out, you think was going to be 35% owned and is still going to be 8-10% owned, and all of a sudden now that's overlay, or at least that's much, much lower rake because there's now dead money in the pot. And this other guy's really good, and he's not going to be as highly owned as he should be because he's cycling in, and maybe the guy playing them now has a much better offensive matchup, and he should be, and that's the second step move not enough people make, by the way. Guy goes out, guy goes in for him, everyone looks at this guy. Not enough people look at the guy across from him and the other guy on this guy's team. Like, oh shit, this guy is out, well, this guy's gonna go nuts. Like, everyone immediately, first reaction is the replacement, and that has plenty of merit, but the defensive effects, and the guys next to him, because this guy is probably not going to step on the court and be a starter and just jack up 32 shots. These guys tend to all get a few extra shots. But you get that news at 6:50, and now you've got a great edge. What do? Do you build more lineups and then enter them? Do you have time to do that? How long does that take you? What's the most efficient way for you to exploit that edge? And most people don't have a good answer to that question. That just sort of happens, and they're like, oh shit, well, I'm going to take that and throw it in some more stuff. what's wrong with having a plan? What's wrong with saying, I'm in that situation leading up to lock on a day. I have a 6:45 plan, a 6:50 plan, and a 6:55 plan. You should test them out. Everyone test it out on Sunday. You all get homework. Set an alarm right now. If you're on a computer, you're on your phone, set an alarm that's for 12:50 Eastern time on Sunday, tomorrow, that says, pretend AJ Green was just announced out. What do you do? Start tapping around and be like, okay, I guess I'd go here. And what do you do? How do you react to that plan? How is it different at 12:45, 12:50, and 12:55? And again, this sounds ridiculous, like a fire drill, but if you're betting $1,000 a day and you can reasonably implement that plan, instead of betting one, you manage to get $3,000 on the table, assuming your bankroll is at least 10 to not make that ridiculously inordinate. And instead of doing okay and making a simple swap and still doing okay on the day and turning your $1,000 into 2,400, you instead turn your $3,000 into 38,000. That's 6 months of work that you got by really understanding, oh, this is how I do it to get more money on the table. And it's you know, one of the processes that I don't see implemented enough. Another one I want to discuss is statistical process versus statistical flexibility. I often say for most sports nowadays, the hardest part of DFS is actually figuring out what the fuck you use, because there's such a massive wealth of information, especially baseball and football. There's so much shit, and everyone has their own algorithm, and they're mostly fine. Some are shit, some are very, very good, but even the best ones are not like a full 15% better than the other ones, because there's just so much known information. It's not that hard to reverse engineer your algorithm to figure out how accurate it's being and then figure out where it deviates, and they're pretty well optimized at this point. I'm not the world's best coder, and I've still made several really, really good ones. So, you know, what stats matter to you, and then when you've made that determination, understand that those values are not static. On a day where the Rockies are playing at home, park factors are much more important than when they're not, because the deviation from their park factor to the next one is so much greater. People talk about umpire factors a lot. There's a lot of umpires in the MLB, and who's behind home plate on each day varies very differently. So if you have a lot of, you may have a day where umpiring factors are almost irrelevant, and then you end up in this whole fallacy where things are not ranked appropriately, they're ranked ordinally. And what I mean by that is, you can have a system that says, okay, I'm gonna target the pitchers who are with the most pitcher-friendly umpires. Well, that's great, but that doesn't say whether the pitcher-friendly umpires are in this range or this range. You know what I'm saying? It's, you know, park factors. Over-under is a better one for an example here. People talk about NBA over-unders, and I will frequently see the same writer say day after day, this game has the highest over-under of the day, I'm going to stack it. Well, sometimes that game is at 236, and the next highest game is at 219, and sometimes that game is at 222, and the next highest game is at 221. This is incredibly relevant. This is irrelevant. So, you know, your process can't constantly value the same things the same way, which is why you have to have a process that inherently, in and to itself, appears flexible. So yeah, and then, you know, the last thing I would say to consider, and this is really just process and not a ton of flexibility, is review. I mean, you want to be flexible to some extent in any of the things you do in this list, and the reviews certainly some days will lead you to think about your process and your investment and your, but you know, how frequently do you look at what has occurred to you in the last, you know, 8 hours of DFS playing and be like, oh, you know what, I really should have done that better. Like, if you're honest with yourself, take a second, close your eyes. Are you being honest? When was the last time you thought at the end of a slate, you know, and I probably did that wrong. I probably should have done this. Versus how many times you thought, oh, shit, I just got unlucky. You know, and the difference between those two things is, again, harkening back one or two shows, the difference between being good and great. I've played a lot of competitive things, from athletics to various games, and at the highest level, with rare exception, the guys who are the greatest are constantly trying to improve and constantly looking back and like, oh, how did I screw that up? And you see lots of people who get close and either slack or just blame it all on bad luck. If that guy hadn't pulled that king on the turn, yeah, but did you really play it perfectly to that point? You know, if that guy hadn't top decked that card, I would have. So, yeah. Tomorrow's difficult. Too many players in good spots. It's not just difficult. In theory, I think it's always difficult, but that's a good question. How does that, and again, I'm obviously prepared anything for this, but how does that affect your strategy? The fact that there are many, many great players for tomorrow's NFL. How does that affect your process? How does that affect your, your building of your teams? Like, let's assign every player in the NFL each week a value rating from 1 to 100. 100 being you expect them to score infinite points and cost no dollars. So no one ever gets to 100. But the closer, the better a play gets with expected production versus value, he goes higher on this scale. What changes when the top 20 players go from a 40 to a 60 on this scale to a 60 to an 80 on this scale? I would think as this sort of asymptotic curve approaches zero, when that happens and there's more good plays, I would think the chalk in tournaments is a bit better, would be my supposition. I would argue to you that if that was the case, and we presume that, on a normal week on the value scale of, dread awful, costs infinite money and produces nothing versus costs nothing and produces infinitely, the farther your best players move towards this curve, the more likely the chalk will hit. And the more likely, I guess the end of the story would be, you should have more chalk in your tournament lineups and just find a guy to separate with. When it seems a little durfy, when the prices have begun to normalize as the season goes on, when there's less fish in the pool, you have to be a little crazier to get the best lineup out of 200, 300,000 lineups. So maybe then you do have two absolutely crazy-ass guys in your lineup. But that's a fine example. That's a good question. Too many players in good spots. Well, what does that change? And again, this is all mathematically trackable. I'm a math guy, but not a mathematician by trade. But you can, in theory, figure this out to a certain extent. By tracking what is chalk and the highest percentage plays. What changes when the chalk is value as opposed to the chalk being expensive. The chalk is more frequently value. I think, most people have known that. It's the number of guys who are high owned tend to be the cheaper guys for that reason. But, again, we were saying before, the running backs, there's 12 underpriced running backs, if not more, actually. There's 12 cheap underpriced running backs. You can certainly, again, say Alex Collins and Christian McCaffrey and plenty of other guys are also underpriced, but just in that little range there. So is it just about picking those guys, or is it about pivoting away from it? Are there so many now that you don't pivot away from it? Like, if there's 4 cheap, and again, I'm just talking aloud here trying to discuss the process, but let's assume there's 4 pretty good to great cheap running backs who cost $4,000 to $4,500. Okay? Maybe there you go, I think there's a decent chance that, maybe only one of them will be good or superlative, so I'm going to pivot away and try to play 2 expensive running backs. Sure. But now what if you say this week you think there's 10? If there's 10, does your focus switch back to not pivoting away, but making sure you get the right 2 or 3? I don't know. My gut is yes, but again, I'm just seeing this for the first time and pulling it out of my ass and making the best guess at it. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good top to bottom rundown and a pretty good number of examples. Certainly will field any questions if anyone has any. I will try to poorly answer your NFL questions if you like, but again, let me get out a big caveat in front that that is not my bread and butter. Though if I don't know, I'll just say I don't know. So I got that going for you. Any questions? Just got here, but wrote an article today talking about trying to tell a story with your lineups based on the best plays. Well, that's a good instinct. Wanting to tell a story with your lineups is a smart way to conduct yourself. Just throwing together guys is great, and sometimes there is no story. But sometimes it's, I think that Atlanta and Philadelphia are, the conditions aren't going to be perfect. It's going to be a bit rainy early in the season. Sometimes defenses get there before offenses. Everyone's looking at all the big plays here. I think this game is going to slow down. I'm going to take some of the defenses and maybe a kicker. And yeah, that got you there this last week. So telling a story, I will say that I'm pretty sure that this would be a fact. Telling a story is more viable the smaller the slate is. So telling a story in a 3-game slate makes a lot of sense because the story is frequently, this game is going to overtime. This game will be really fast. Something like that. you're usually telling a story about a game or 2 games. I think these 2 games will outperform, and these 2 or whatever. But the more games that are there, the more likely then, which is again correlates to something I talked about in the last show or the one before, where stacking a game is more viable the fewer games there are, because your advantage is actually greater and your disadvantage is actually less. That being, you're not playing as many guys from the other games. But yeah, Ricky, I think telling a story makes a lot of sense. I do think it's harder when you're looking at whatever the NFL main slate is tomorrow. I haven't even looked how many, if they're taking the afternoon games. Is it 11 games? Probably 8 early, 3 in the afternoon, something like that. Again, is what we're looking at. So. Like Kamara is going to be mega chalk with 15 great running backs. I think it's viable that Thomas scores the touchdowns over Kamara and allows me to get another great running back by getting exposure to the Kamara game. Yeah, I mean, one of the difficult things about this is you never know if you're right. You just don't. All the variables change. Everything gets scrapped and goes out the window for the next week. So you may play it perfectly and get absolutely crushed. There is, in God's eyes or in the all-knowing statistical eye, someone could tell you, look, if Kamara played this game 100 times, these are the results you would get. And this is what his ownership ended up being. Therefore, it was correct to do this. You can sort of make that supposition. But you're never really going to know, because he's either going to have an average game in which, shrug, no one gives a shit. He's going to overperform that price and put up 38 fantasy points, and he'll be like, oh, I should have had him. Or he'll get hurt, of course, or just have a somewhat poor game, and people will be, who do I got there? I don't know who you are, but I like Riding Dirty as a track. I'm incredibly white, so that's one of the, I like White and Nerdy by Weird Al Yankovic, based on the same, but yeah, of the very few rap songs I've karaoke'd, Riding Dirty is one of them, so there that is. So I think that's Texas rap there. Yeah, but you think it's viable that Thomas scores over Kamara? Sure, Kamara is super expensive and going to be very popular. Probably the most popular, expensive play on the slate. You can absolutely justify it. They have 2 running backs on the roster, I believe. Just him and Mike Gillislee, who was sitting on a couch 10 days ago. How much is Gillislee really going to do? Kamara has shown he can be a beast. The matchup is wonderful. Yeah, there's all the support in the world to get there. And again, the argument that, again, there's so many good, cheap running backs that we should be happier about him, because some of that ownership has been siphoned off by the fact that people are searching out their value at running back instead of searching out that value at wide receiver or tight end or quarterback. So lots of good reasons to play Alvin Kamara there, and then the reasons not to play him are, it's not real hard to, get a hangnail and get knocked out of an NFL game. He's super expensive and super popular. I know for NBA, usage and minutes are the most important variables. How do you measure NFL variables? That's a great question. I don't currently measure NFL variables. In the past, I was a fan of having a good understanding and handling things mostly mathematically at the salary level. I tried to guess ownership, although I was doing cash a lot. And it would sometimes be as simple as looking at ordinal designation on site. So you could go to a good site like fantasypros.com as a great ratings aggregator to give you just a good, if you want a comprehensive list of, these are the best quarterbacks in order, which of and by itself isn't great, but I used to compare that with downloads from the various sites of the prices of the quarterbacks in order. So I'll give you an example. And again, this is a very simple way to do it, but just at the first level, it would say that, okay, Drew Brees is the 3rd best quarterback. Just accepting it at that point, it would say I've got Aaron Rodgers and then Deshaun Watson and then Drew Brees, let's say. And then I would look at Drew Brees' site price ordinally on the various sites. And again, it would have the actual price next to it, so I could figure out the actual variation there. But it would tell me that if I was playing on 4 sites, that Drew Brees was the 2nd most expensive quarterback on FanDuel, the 3rd most expensive quarterback on DraftKings, the 5th most expensive quarterback on Fantasy Draft, and the 6th most expensive quarterback on Yahoo. Well, if all that and my research and my reading led me to like Drew Brees, I would make sure to have him on those other 2 sites pretty strongly, etc., etc. So I looked at it a lot at that level. I generally trust people, like I trust Vegas to know how to set a line. I rarely sports bet, I rarely buy crypto, I rarely do things where I don't think I have an edge. And there's other things I can gamble on where I think I do have one. So I'll gamble on a 3-point shooting contest. I'll gamble on a game of ping pong. I'll gamble on... I like to gamble. But I never understood going like, yeah, there was a huge, huge crypto craze. I knew hundreds of people who were like, dude, you should get into crypto. I'm in crypto. And I would usually say the same thing. Okay, why do you think you will make money relative to everyone else attempting to do the same thing? And very rarely did I get an answer that was convincing. Sometimes someone would be like, well, I do a better job than most people of studying the... Okay, that's possible. But I didn't want to put in piles of time that I don't really have to study crypto, so I just said, okay, I have no reason to think that I'm advantaged, and I refuse to think this will turn into just giving away free money to bros 24/7 for 10 years, so I'm just, I'm sure the bottom will fall out sooner than later, because you can't create wealth from nothing, and obviously that happened at some point. So, the same thing. I don't, I can read Evan Silva's article on Roto World, which he's been doing for 10 years, which is a masterpiece. It is the best thing that is frequently produced in the DFS industry. He does an amazing job of taking a vast amount of data and information, keeping it conversational and not boring, and putting it into a suffused space where anyone can read it in 45 minutes. It's incredible. You can read that article, do a little salary work like I mentioned, and be just as good as anyone, or very, very, very close. Are there edges? Sure. Absolutely I know enough about the NFL that I think this guy, even though he's a wide receiver 3, will pick up more snaps, and I've done enough research to show that even though this team is really, really good against slot receivers, that has to do more with the fact that the safety wasn't blitzing as much. Now that they've dialed up their safety blitzes, we expect in this new system from only 6% to 22% of blitzes. I think that will take away from their efficiency versus the slot, and there's, of course, infinite to go there. But Hunt and Johnson look like good pivots. Nobody's talking about them. With no Bell as Antonio Brown, an even better play. Well, in a vacuum he would be, but I think it's supposed to be like apocalyptic weather. Now, that man can run some fucking slot routes, and I don't think he's out of play. But, yes, with no Bell, is Antonio Brown an even better play? Yes. I think that's just a flat yes. Certain people would say, well, without Bell, they're able to focus on Antonio more, and if they can't get Connor going on the ground, the entire offense will be less efficient, less fast, maybe. You could make an argument that Connor slows them down a few seconds of play, and because of that, the entire offense will be less efficient, and so there will be less touchdowns, and that makes Brown a worse play. I would disagree with that narrative, but I shouldn't state it as a fact. To me, you keep everything else the same, you take Le'Veon Bell out and put in James Conner, Antonio Brown becomes a better play. But I do think there are people who would argue the other way. 20+ mile-an-hour winds. Yeah, people are talking about the Browns belt / no Bell splits are massively in favor of no Bell. Right, and one would expect so. So that's, and I appreciate you bringing up the stat. I had no idea that was the stat. And this is one of my favorite things in the process of being a tout. Not that this matters for anyone, but it actually could be very similar for your process. I like when something looks good and then I look it up and it occurs. Like I do a lot, again, basketball is my bread and butter, and I would be in a lot of shows. And I would, be talking with Adam, and we'd find out news that someone was out, and then Adam would run off to run the stats, and I would be like, what, I found that, when Kyle Lowry is out, it doesn't actually increase Jonas Valanciunas' production. It actually decreases it because whomever they're bringing in, Corey Joseph et al., doesn't really know how to get the big man involved, and that's sort of a refined process, so you just see a little more drive and dish, a little more DeRozan. You don't get much out of Valanciunas. Then Adam would come back and go, I looked it up, that's right, and I'd be like, okay, good. That's my favorite thing when it's like, it should be this, or it looks like it's been this to me, and then someone runs the numbers and goes, that's what it is. It's like, okay, that's sort of the validation. Because one without the other always feels bad. I don't like saying, again, I'm a math guy, I don't like saying, it just looks this way, I feel like this should happen, without any statistical backup, obviously feels hollow, because nobody's perfect, and I'm sure I get that wrong 10% of the time, where I'm like, this should happen, and it doesn't. And stats, bereft of experience or understanding, are probably better. They're true more of the time than vice versa, but they're still not thrilling. It can be kind of shitty. So, another great question. How about talented guys in bad matchups? Like McCoy has talent, will be underowned because of matching a guy. Odell Beckham Jr. Again, I would look up his degree of success. This is not the first time he's seen Jalen Ramsey. I would spend some time doing, seeing what happened, looking at that game. He's still going to get his. He's still going to get targets. I think he would be lower down the list of guys I would go for, because at his price and everything, you need to have a really superlative game to get there. But, that's obviously yet another question. In that type of weather, they are more likely to run the ball than throw. That as well, and that was the caveat. If you're just saying, Le'Veon Bell is out, what do you think about Antonio Brown? I'd be like, well, that's great. I like Antonio Brown much more. Let's get him in there. It depends on how bad the weather is. I played quarterback and even after high school played casually in leagues for a long time, and there's a big difference between some wind and fucking wind. There's times like if it's as bad as they're talking about 20-mile-an-hour wind with rain coming down, you can't throw the ball beyond 15 yards with much accuracy unless obviously someone shakes someone and gets entirely loose. So, that doesn't mean, Antonio Brown can do everything and run the ball and get it behind the lines and run a sweep, and there's just a billion things the guy can do. He's an incredibly good football player, but if you are precluding the option of him ever getting a 20-yard reception, yeah, that's a killer to me. If you're saying there's, 14-mile-an-hour winds with gusts up to 20 and the rain's going to come and go, okay. There's a Browns defense that's better, but they're not good. And I think the ownership will be fairly significantly down. But that's a real question. Ownership projections are a huge part of this game. And it's really difficult to do sometimes. Because sometimes you are in a situation with that where you have contrasting factors. And how do you judge them all and figure out what ownership is going to be? Following Twitter is a good idea, believe it or not. I read, 4,000 comments about football a day right now. The tone and the tenor of those help shape what I expect the ownership to be on any given slate. So, Le'Veon Bell is out. Antonio Brown's going to be better in the theory. Juju going to be better in theory. But these guys, how bad is the weather going to be? How well are you prepared in your process to optimize the fact that the weather is going to be either better than you thought or worse than you thought tomorrow? Because if you're playing any significant number of lineups, you're building some tonight. Probably. Okay, so you've got whatever. You should have an idea in theory now. Okay, the weather is 40 miles an hour. No one can see more than 12 feet. 40 miles an hour wind. No one can see more than 12 feet. Both teams are going to run the ball 92% of the time. It's going to become a battle in the trenches. Okay, you out there looking for Browns running backs yet? You out there what's your plan? Oh, no, the weather cleared up. It's going to be great. Oh, shit, I need a plan to get my more exposure to Antonio Brown. Lack of surface traction makes it just as hard to move whenever you have to. Yeah, it derfs the whole game, but just for running backs, it becomes an issue of you get more screen passes as opposed to pass passes because you can't just run it up the gut 80% of the time. I mean, you can, but it doesn't go well anyone is credit. So you get reverse, screen pass, bubble, all this other random shit, and so that helps. But it just becomes touches. You just get 58 running back touches instead of 31. Yeah, all that true. Any other questions? I'll stay till you're done. Well, I'm thinking of taking my wife to the burlesque show in Cincinnati tonight. Not like a good burlesque show. Guys, if you haven't noticed this, taking your wife or significant other to someplace where women are stripping, if she's into that, works well. She feels the need to keep up. Just giving her my seal of approval. My broken thumb seal of approval. Not my non-broken thumb, but my broken thumb seal of approval. You are in there. This, interestingly enough, will not be the shirt I wear, but my wife frequently refers to this as my gay fisting t-shirt, which certainly isn't my intention. I've lost a fair bit of weight since I got it, but it used to be fairly tight, and it's got a big fist in the middle of it. And at one point, I was out with the wife at a gay bar, as you will. That happens. And unintentionally was wearing this shirt, and she's like, I think some people may be taking that to mean something it doesn't. And they did. And that was fun. So you should try that. Questions, anyone? Last series of questions. So again, might do a personal Periscope tonight. Might do one tomorrow. Or the next day driving to Chicago and back. That's not a bad idea. Hoping to do a show sitting next to Awesemo on Tuesday. Pry out a couple secrets for, how he's making 7 digits a year playing DFS. It's probably good information to have. And then I'm going to start my divisional breakdown on this coming Wednesday. Probably do 3 days a week the next 2 weeks after that. Breaking it down by division, looking at each team and how to get the most out of them in the preseason. Where people I think will go and where we can move away from. A good example again, as we talked about Detroit before. Dwayne Casey is incredibly stingy with minutes in the preseason. He's been doing it for a long time, and he just moved to Detroit, and he's got an entirely new team. He's going to want to look at some dudes. That team's going to average 17 minutes a player in the preseason. Last year, they averaged probably the second most minutes per player. Anyone who just looks at last year's numbers is going to think Pistons are really good. They're not going to be really good. Lakers win total 60. I had 59. So you and I are very close to each other. Ricky, I had 59 if you have 60. So take 59 and a half. Hopefully I'll have time to do an over-under pod. Maybe I'll ask you on there. I'm going to add some stuff, try to bring some other people on there. But yeah, maybe I'll ask you to stop by, Ricky. 17 minutes is enough for Drummond / Blake to smash. Yeah, man, and their prices will adjust, and you know, but yeah, Drummond averaged, oh god, I want to say 16 rebounds in his 31 minutes a game in the preseason last year. My guy put up some numbers. I like Dre. All these people with comp projections saying like 43 on Twitter. How do you disrespect the king like that? 43. Come on now. LeBron went to the finals. The finals. Look at the team LeBron went to the finals in whatever, 07 or whatever the hell it was. 43 wins. I know he's out west. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know how you disrespect the king like that. That's jacked up. That's the sound I found today. This is pretty bad. So I was going back through my records when I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment for a little while, and they had these cards. These are loot cards, and what this is they got a little code on them. I'll try to show it to both cameras. They have a little code on them. It's got a little scratch off thing, and there's a code under that. And inside the MMO game of World of Warcraft, you can scratch this off. There's a guy there. You can give him this code, and he gives you an item that you can only get through these. And I found this stack today, which is good, because this stack is worth several $1,000s. Which is a good thing to find, randomly, when you're cleaning out your closet. I think I may have like a stack like this somewhere, so I really got to find them. But the most expensive loot card in the game is called Spectral Tiger. It's good for $3,000 or $4,000. And I found one, but it is neither scratched. I will show you what scratched looks like. Scratched is this guy I've already used. You can't redeem this code anymore. I already scratched it off. You know, there's that guy. There's a bear mount that's worth, you know, $500 or something. I already used this guy. You can't use him. And I have a Spectral Tiger loot card here, which doesn't have a code on it. It's not there. And again, people say they made a Spectral Tiger that doesn't have codes. That's true, but if you look at the bottom there, and it's got the red text, that's what you show when it's the loot one. So somehow I have what I imagine is an incredibly rare misprint of I have a loot card with no loot code on it, which means that this stack of cards is worth $1,000 and not, say, 4 today. So that was disappointing. Thoughts on how dominant Fortnite's game development team is? I haven't played enough Fortnite to know. I want to get more time into it. I want to do some streaming. Everyone else does it. I think I'm more inclined to stream different types of games. But I have a fairly uber gaming PC here that I just built. But I'm not up to date on, you know, comparing my Fortnites to my Overwatches to my Battlegrounds. You know, keeping all three of those straight. So I wouldn't have anything terribly intelligent to say on the topics as to how good their development teams are. You know, but I would think I could get a job at one of those places if I want. I had again a few years at Activision Blizzard, and I have friends who work at Riot and friends who still work there, obviously, and they change the game like twice a week. It's absurd. Yeah, it's again, I'm biased because I work there, but Blizzard was always the gold standard for me. They never put out a bad game, and they would frequently shit can titles they'd been working on for 3 years because they just weren't good. They'd work on them and work on them and be like, that's not good enough, that's not good enough, that's not good enough. Man, it's never going to be good enough. Fuck it. We spent $4 million developing it, but put it in the garbage. Respect. That's a good job. They valued their brand over everything. And it worked. Now, they had the luxury of World of Warcraft going nuts. Obviously, they get the credit for that making them the hundreds of millions of dollars a year that it does. You know, respect for them not putting out shit. Blackout looks good. First AAA Battle Royale game. Yeah. Yeah. No, Battle Royale, obviously as a concept, has proven itself very good. I have some friends who are working more on mobile competitive gaming, who I was reading something about recently, and I'm excited to see what they can do in that space, because it's not really fully fleshed out compared to console or PC. Clearly the fastest growing genre. Yeah, I would certainly think that to be the case. It is the MOBA, if you will, of the last few years. So yeah, I mean, these things go in cycles. You know, we had, you know, first person shooters. Then there was a real time where you know, strategy was a thing with the StarCraft, Warcraft, Command and Conquer. And then there were a few years where adventure games. Then obviously there were a few years of the sandbox games where we got into things like Skyrim and Grand Theft Auto and things like that really being the dominant force of the market. And then back into first-person shooters. Like there was the first era first-person shooters of, you know, Doom, Doom 2, Quake, Wolfenstein up to Unreal, Unreal 2, that sort of golden age. And then sort of a second one where we got into the Call of Duty Modern Warfare and the first Battlefields and that epic into now with the advantages. Just because of addictiveness, 1 of 100 wins really helps that they are competitive and want to continue to play. Sure. Yeah, no, I love gaming. I miss it significantly. Someday I'll do a whole story on how that all went up and down, but it wouldn't shock me to get back into it someday. You know, we'll see how it goes. I like my career right now. I really like the people I work with. I've been doing it for 7 years or so. But yeah, game design and development, both analog and digital. I've been lucky to work on a couple video games, but many more card games and board games and things of that nature. I really enjoy games of that time. I'm just browsing, but the NBA stats page is the gold standard. Yeah, they're of all the leagues, they do the best job of presenting their old information. It's really, really good. What is the biggest edge in NBA preseason DFS? Jesus, I want to say me, but I don't know how to be that conceited. I mean, I do, but I'm not comfortable being that conceited. All right. The biggest edge in NBA preseason DFS is either going to be coaches or in-depth beat reporter research. They're both really critical, and both of them are much more valuable during the preseason than they are proportionately during the regular season. Don't get me wrong, during the regular season, coaches become almost irrelevant because their tendencies become amortized into the players, where that isn't the case as the season starts and the preseason starts. But, you know, following beat reporters is still a really good idea, but there it's sort of more just for what's going to change as the game starts. It's the 655 beat reporters. Here, you just want to be reading every fucking thing everyone says. We're like, oh, I saw this guy and he said this, and for that reason I think that this guy is going to play with the ones, and then all that stuff is so much more important, and it's more important to go directly to the source because, again, everyone's resources are focused on baseball and football for a little while, so that information does not get conveyed as reliably through other medium to DFS players. The more time, the more edge generally works more in preseason than it would in regular season. Yeah, I think that's also the case. Like, I would like to, it's approaching a statistically relevant sample size that I'm now talking about, you know, 50 slates or something, or 60 slates, and rather than, you know, I'm happy if, you know, every third day I feel like winners outnumbered losers, and at least 70% of the time we beat the field in expected participation. Preseason, all up, down, and over it really, really consistently, and seemingly for good reasons. People just play bad guys. People just play guys from the wrong teams. People just overreact to game one when the beat reporters clearly reported they were going to try something different in game two. So, yeah. I mean, at the end of the last preseason, I honestly considered, like, retiring and just being like, you know what, I'll come back for the next preseason. This is too good. Like, the person who spends 6 hours researching a preseason slate will outperform the 1 hour researcher more than they would if it was December. I mean, that's a little bit of a supposition because I don't know where the two people hypothetically start from in that example. But yeah, in general, I do feel that is the case. I also don't know how they're both researching. Like, I would research preseason basketball one way and someone else would do it a much, much different way. You know, I would spend time looking at the coaches and looking at the beat reporters and looking at, you know, the schedule and all these other things. Someone else might just be 6 hours of research, lol. I mean, I won't hit 6, but I'll average 4 for the first dozen NBA preseason and regular season slates. It'll be a number. I do hours the night before and a couple hours a day of. Yeah. I mean, Summer League, especially because I'm not as familiar with college basketball, I put in some fucking time, and it paid off. Summer League was yeah. But, yeah, it's some time. Like, if you want to, for each team, I want to be able to tell you, this is what they did last year, this is what they're going to do this year, here's who's coming into camp, here's who I expect to start, here's what I expect them to do in the preseason, here's their coach, here was their coach last year, is it the same guy, here's their expected record, here's who I expect to get the time, here's how the coach has done this in previous years, how we got, like, there's just so much. What about being a good talent evaluator? Again, that is one minor edge that occasionally can be great. Hey, they brought up this guy from Red River, and you're like, oh, I know that guy. That guy's going to be great. And with this guy, I think he's going to play 20 minutes. He's going to give me 15 points, and no one else will know it. Yeah, that can be enough to randomly take down a GPP one day. You can use Summer League to get an idea. Yeah, Summer League, even more random, but very researchable, as I think we proved. Preseason, little less random. Regular guys got to get some time. But, yeah, dedication. Spends on the slate side with 6 hours you do alone is pretty viable if you don't want to look back at the slate and say, shit, I missed that. And again, I think a lot of people, and this will be the last thing, and then I'll close it, but I think a lot of people do not understand the concept of opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is what you expend by doing the time, doing whatever the thing is, instead of doing something else. So 6 hours of research is fine for DFS, but you better be playing a couple $100 or more, or that is not an efficient use of your time. If you go to college, people say, how much does it cost you to go to college? Someone will say, well, rooms and board and the classes and the whole thing cost me $53,000 to get my degree. And I'm like, It cost you $53,000 plus whatever money you didn't earn working for 4 years. So what could you have earned? Construction. Whatever the best job you could have got out of high school. What was that going to pay you? Well, it was going to pay me $65,000 a year. Okay, so I had that $260,000. Then add whatever interest and whatever you would have achieved from that. Then add whatever interest you're going to pay on those student loans. Then add it's opportunity cost. Sure, 6 hours of work for a slate is fine if you really want to get it right, or if it's your job, or if that's what it takes. I mean, if you can't play, if you don't spend 6 hours and be a winning player, then spend 6 hours or don't play. But, there is a really significant opportunity cost. Economic profit versus accounting profit. I don't even know entirely what that means. I'm not familiar with that phrase, but it sounds good, so we'll go with that. But, yeah. If you're playing, $1,000 a slate, 6 hours is fine. 6 hours makes a lot of sense to invest that kind of time. And look for tomorrow. Do you have a Yahoo account? I have a feeling they're going to overlay significantly on NFL again tomorrow. Their biggest tournament isn't huge. I don't know what it is offhand. I haven't looked this year, but it's probably 50 grand or something. But it's only going to take in 38 because they have a max limit of $10 to enter the fucking thing and max of 10 entries. Usually putting, I'm going to look now. Let me see if I can get that. I think I can still view the lobby. Usually, it's just an edge, but just playing on Yahoo for the first couple weeks was stupid. Let's see what they got. The $250,000 baller. Excuse me, $250,000. You can only, it's $10 to enter. Stick with me here. It's $10 to enter. You can only enter 10 times, so it's a maximum of $100 per person that you can put into this thing. And it is currently at 7.5 thousand entries out of the 28,400 it needs to fill. Okay? So it needs 21,000 entries to fill, which means it needs 2,100 people to fill. I'm going to get there. Okay? What time is it Saturday night? 7:30? You're going to look at that thing in the morning, and at 11 o'clock in the morning, Eastern, 2 hours before this shit kicks off, that thing's going to be 14,000 out of 28,000 will be my guess. And it's going to run at maybe 20,000. So that tournament will take in, 200K and pay out 250K, something like that. So negative 20 or 25% rake. That's better than anything I'm going to tell you. If you haven't done it yet, spend your $100 on Yahoo. Yeah, they've been bleeding me. I haven't looked at Fantasy Draft yet. Shall we look at Fantasy Draft? Let's look at Fantasy Draft. I may not even have a... It's been so long, I may not even have, like, a hot link for what's that... That's a no longer existing content. Like, my bookmarks in Chrome are a monument to dead DFS sites. I'm just going to leave it that way. Fantasy Aces, no. Fantasy Hub, no, you don't exist anymore. Fantasy Draft, first week, $200,000 run and go, Sunday only. Currently 2161 out of 9194. $25 entry fee. Let me see if I can find out what their max entries of 150. Okay, so they've given up on their... They used to have a whole thing where people weren't allowed to... So they've given up on not overlaying, huh? Okay. I think they had a thing for a while where they had many fewer entries allowed. I think you were allowed, it's like 20 entries into that tournament or something. Not 150, I'll put it that way. So they've given that up. So that is a little more dubious. There's not as much value there because you don't know what's going to happen. The Yahoo thing, if you look with an hour to go and that thing's half full, there's just not physically enough people in the industry to get enough money in time. This thing, someone could put in 150 entries. And that represents almost 2% of the field. That overlay can disappear in a gigantic hurry. But, you know, check there for overlay. I don't know, how's that DraftKings 5 million going? Let's take a look at that. 5 million Roman fantasy football millionaire, 163.4 thousand out of 294.1 thousand. Okay, so there's not going to be any overlay there. Might not fill. If I had to guess right now, I will guess that it does not fill. But it certainly won't overlay. It might, though. Don't know. That's a very interesting one. So anyhow, we will end it there for today. But again, you know, get your free money at Yahoo. If you want to play more than $100, or you want to play with the chance of winning 6 digits instead of 5 digits or 4 digits, that's fine. But get your free money at Yahoo. Go get your free money. All right, everyone, that is it for today. Those in the Chicago area, I hope you will do me the honor of stopping by. Check my Twitter for the details. My pleasure as always, and looking forward to getting into some real specifics. So God bless. Good luck.